In the quiet town of Copper Creek, a legend was reborn. Samuel Kincade, once the infamous gunslinger known as the Pole Bearer, found himself trapped between his violent past and the peaceful life he desperately wanted to keep. When the notorious Fletcher brothers arrived with 10 deadly gunmen, Sam knew he faced impossible odds. But what happened next shocked everyone. Using strategy, courage, and the help of the town's brave citizens, Sam turned an ambush into a legendary showdown, revealing truths long hidden and turning enemies into allies. If you want to know how this incredible confrontation ended, stay with us until the very end. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to support the channel and follow more captivating stories like this one. Silas Dunbar was known around Copper Creek as Silent Silas, a stagecoach driver who rarely spoke above a whisper. He was lean, with a perpetual layer of dust coating his coat and hat from endless travels along the perilous routes that cut through harsh territory. For 3 years, he had driven stagecoaches between Copper Creek and Fort Laramie. In all that time, Harriet Dawson, who managed the local stage station, had never once seen him raise his voice, lose his composure, or waste a single motion. That particular afternoon, Harriet watched Silas from the station's porch as he inspected the undercarriage of the 6-horse Concord coach. Every bolt, spring, and latch was examined with the precision of a craftsman. Off to the side, old Jim Taggart sat whittling a piece of pine while Dr. Abraham Lowe read a pair of letters at a makeshift table near the station's well. The doctor, Harriet knew, was the only person in town who seemed to understand a hint of Silas's past. The two men sometimes exchanged knowing glances, but never spoke openly about the secrets that lurked behind Silas's quiet eyes. Eventually, Sheriff Carter Westlake rode in, coat plastered with trail dust. He dismounted stiffly, tipping his hat to Harriet and Silas. "Harriet, Silas," he greeted, voice tinged with urgency. "I just came through Sweetwater. Word is Gideon Slater's gang was spotted heading this way." Harriet paused, pen hovering over her station ledger. "Gideon Slater?" she echoed, her expression darkening. "I thought he and his men stayed north these days." "Times change," the sheriff replied. "They robbed a bank up in Preston last week. Territory marshals have been cracking down. So rumor has it Slater's crew is drifting south, looking for easier pickings. They've got 5 men, Slater himself, the Santos brothers, Felix Morrow, and that hot-headed kid, Jonas Pierce." Silas's hands never stopped their methodical checks, but Harriet noticed the faintest flicker in his eyes when the sheriff mentioned Slater's name. It was the barest hint of recognition or dread, something only a person who knew how to watch Silas's silence would catch. "We haven't got much worth stealing," Harriet said firmly, as though stating a wish might make it so. "Maybe so," Westlake conceded. "Still, I'd feel better sending for help from Fort Laramie. That's at least 3 days away," Silas said softly, setting a lantern on the work table. "If Slater's coming, it'll be sooner than that." Westlake nodded. "Then we'll keep our eyes open." He turned and strolled toward the corral, leaving Harriet to contemplate the sheriff's warning. Nearby, Dr. Lowe stacked his letters neatly and glanced in Silas's direction. Everyone in Copper Creek knew Silas Dunbar had a mysterious history. They just didn't realize how dark it truly was. That evening, Harriet was settling the station's accounts by lamplight when a commotion outside broke the quiet. A ranch hand from the Wilson place came galloping in at breakneck speed, calling out for the sheriff. Carter Westlake emerged from the shadows, revolver at his side, as the breathless young man nearly toppled from his horse. "They're coming!" the ranch hand cried. "Slater's gang just burned down the Simmons ranch. They killed Mr. Simmons and his farmhands. Said they'd do worse if folks got in their way." Fear drew a hush over the station yard. Harriet set down her ledger. "Doctor." Lowe slid from his chair, stethoscope and medical bag close at hand, as if sensing his services would soon be needed. Silas, for his part, showed no outward reaction beyond a subtle shift in posture. Weight balanced on the balls of his feet, ready for the worst. "How far?" Westlake demanded. "Less than 2 hours behind me," the ranch hand said, eyes wide. "They're riding hard." The sheriff muttered a curse. "Tell everyone in town to bar their doors. No one goes outside tonight. Harriet, you should cancel tomorrow's stage." "Don't," Silas interrupted. so softly that Harriet wondered if she'd heard correctly. Her eyes flicked to him. Why not? Silas raised his gaze. If the stage stops running, Slater's men will know we're scared. Let's keep to the usual schedule. Westlake eyed him. You got something in mind, Dunbar? Silas only shrugged. A man can't run forever. Nothing more was said on the matter. Soon the ranch hand galloped back into the dark, spreading word of the gang's imminent arrival. Harriet turned down the lamps, plunging the station into near darkness. Despite the tension, Silas calmly groomed the horses, offered them feed, and then retired to his small bunk in the adjacent shed. Yet Harriet could tell he wouldn't be sleeping much. Neither would the rest of Copper Creek. Morning found the town somber and still. Residents clustered in their homes, ignoring the usual routines of commerce. No blacksmith's hammer rang out, no chatter floated from the saloon. An uneasy quiet draped Copper Creek like an ill-fitting shroud. Amidst the hush, Harriet occupied her usual spot on the station porch, ledger in her lap. She watched the road nervously while Silas readied the stagecoach. He was thorough as always, but Harriet sensed an added intensity to his actions, as though he were a soldier preparing for an imminent battle. The sheriff arrived on foot, dusty from patrolling the outskirts. No sign of them yet, Carter Westlake said, accepting a cup of Harriet's lukewarm coffee. But they'll come, sure as sin. Silas nodded. He finished adjusting a harness and climbed onto the driver's seat, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. I'll be taking this run alone? No passengers, Harriet said. Nobody wants to travel with Slater's gang in the area. Westlake paced. Take care out there, Dunbar. If you see Slater's crew, don't do anything foolish. Silas offered the sheriff a ghost of a smile. Never do, he replied softly. With that, he snapped the reins, guiding the horses onto the main road. The stage rolled away, Harriet's worry trailing behind him like a shadow. Neither she nor the sheriff had any idea that Gideon Slater's gang would strike sooner than any of them feared, nor that Silas was on a collision course with the secrets of his own past. An hour later, Harriet's nerves had her cleaning shelves in the station office just to keep busy. Dr. Lowe was there too, mixing herbal remedies. As they worked in tense silence, the door slammed open and a lanky figure with a battered hat lurched in. He looked half-crazed, eyes wide. They're here, he cried. Spotted Slater and his men up by Split Rock Creek. They shot Tommy Jenkins. Boy never had a chance. They're riding in, guns drawn. Harriet felt her heart jolt. Dr. Lowe grabbed his medical satchel and ran outside, presumably heading for the wounded, if any remained alive. She hurried to the window. Down the dusty main street, figures on horseback emerged, 6 silhouettes moving with grim purpose. Gideon Slater rode at their head. He was broad-shouldered with a pale grin that hinted at casual brutality. Behind him came Manuel and Marcus Santos, the rangy Felix Morrow, and Jonas Pierce, a wiry youth bursting with untamed menace. Where was Silas? Harriet's stomach twisted. Was he already caught in the gang's path? Slater reined in outside the station. For a heartbeat, Harriet froze, unsure if she should greet them or hide. But it was too late. Slater dismounted, strode up the steps, and kicked the door wide. He surveyed the office with cold satisfaction. Mornin', he drawled. Name's Gideon Slater. I'm here for a bit of a donation. Harriet forced her voice to steady. We don't have much. Slater's grin was reptilian. You'll give what you got, or folks end up like that Jenkins boy. Behind him, Jonas Pierce chuckled darkly, and Harriet's blood ran cold. She realized with sudden clarity that it didn't matter if the station had anything valuable. Slater's men thrived on fear and cruelty for its own sake. Then, as if on cue, the sound of distant wheels reached her ears. The stagecoach was returning. Harriet dared to hope that Silas might pass them by, but the coach drew closer until it rattled into view. Silas brought the horses to an abrupt stop in front of the station. He glanced at Slater, and Slater smirked back. Well now, Slater said, stepping onto the porch. Looks like this driver's come just in time to entertain us. The standoff crackled with tension. Harriet stood behind the station counter, her heart pounding as Slater's men fanned out. Silas Dunbar seemed unnaturally calm, perched high on the driver's seat. Sheriff Westlake was nowhere in sight, likely investigating rumors of trouble on the outskirts or trying to direct townspeople to safety. That left Harriet, Dr. Lowe, and a handful of frightened townsfolk trapped between Slater's gang and Silas's unwavering stillness. Slater sauntered forward, hooking his thumbs in his gun belt. "Driver," he said, addressing Silas, "got anything worth taking in that coach of yours?" Silas hopped down. Even with the threat looming, his posture remained relaxed. "Nothing but mail sacks," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Jonas Pierce barked a laugh. "Man speaks like he's half asleep. Maybe we can wake him up some." Harriet watched Silas's face for any sign of fear or anger, but it revealed nothing. He merely leveled his gaze at the young outlaw. Something about Silas's eyes made Jonas's laughter falter. Slater motioned one of the Santos brothers, Manuel, to check the coach. Manuel rummaged through the cargo area, cursed under his breath, and reported back. "Not much. Some letters, flour sacks, maybe a few coins in the strongbox." "It'll do," Slater said. He turned, focusing fully on Silas. "Where's the sheriff in this backwater? Hiding?" Silas didn't answer. Harriet squeezed her hands together, knuckles white. If Slater pushed Silas too far, if he discovered the quiet driver was more than just a mild-mannered employee, the bloodshed would be terrible. Yet maybe that was the only way to protect Copper Creek from these killers. Slater grabbed Harriet by the arm, yanking her from behind the counter. "I asked a question. Somebody better answer, or I start shooting people." She hissed in pain but held her head high. "Sheriff Westlake is out in the foothills," she said. "He won't be back for hours." A grin cut across Slater's face. "Then we'll wait." He shoved her into a chair, turning back to Silas. "You, tie the horses up proper. Don't want you thinking of riding out on us." Silas nodded once. While he tended the team, Dr. Lowe moved quietly, offering to help Harriet. The outlaws let him, at least for the moment. Jonas Pierce, perched on the railing, fingered his gun like a restless kid picking at a scab. "Tell me, driver," Jonas said, aiming to provoke. "You always so quiet, or you just scared?" Silas didn't glance up. Man who talks too much sometimes doesn't hear trouble coming. The retort was mild, but Jonas stiffened. Slater noticed his henchman's reaction and smirked. "Careful, Jonas. He's got a point." Before Jonas could respond, a shot rang out from down the street. Everyone tensed. Felix Morrow, who had been watching the road, ducked inside. "Rider coming in fast," he reported. "Looks like Westlake." Relief coursed through Harriet. Maybe the sheriff had mustered a posse or found a way to outflank Slater. But when Carter Westlake galloped up to the station, his expression was grim, and he rode alone. He barely had time to dismount when the Santos brothers and Jonas Pierce leveled guns at him. "Whoa," Westlake said, raising his hands. "Slater, is it? We don't want any trouble." "Too late for that," Slater replied, stepping out onto the porch. "That's your only deputy?" He jerked his chin at Silas, whose back was turned as if he were still fussing with the harness. Westlake shook his head. "He's just the stage driver. Let Harriet and these folks go, and we can talk about—" Slater's bullet cut him off. The shot roared in the confined space of the station's porch. Westlake spun backward with a cry, his shoulder erupting in blood. Harriet screamed and Silas whirled around, half a second too late to stop it. Doc Lowe rushed to the sheriff's side, pressing a hand to the wound. "He needs help," the doctor snapped, glaring at Slater. "He'll bleed out." "Then fix him," Slater said, flicking his gun barrel to motion the doctor aside. "But don't go thinking of any fancy business." Harriet held back tears as she watched Dr. Lowe tear open Westlake's shirt to stanch the bleeding. Meanwhile, Slater's men re-aimed their weapons at Silas, who stood immobile, fists clenched at his sides. One misstep, Harriet realized, and they'd kill him next. For a heartbeat, Harriet was sure Silas would lunge forward, gun drawn. Yet he didn't. Instead, he took a long, slow breath. Then, with measured calm, he stepped toward the station door and spoke so quietly that everyone had to strain to hear. "There's no need for more shooting," Slater snorted. "We'll decide what's needed." He pointed his revolver at Silas. "You move funny. You end up like the sheriff here." No one noticed Silas's right hand inching toward the interior of his long canvas coat. Harriet's gaze flicked downward in time to see him touch something. A revolver holster, well hidden against the lining. A realization crashed over her. Silas Dunbar had been armed this entire time. More than that, he moved with a certain fluidity that suggested the weapon was an extension of his body. "Hold it," Slater commanded. "Keep them hands where I can see." Silas froze, but Harriet had the distinct sense that he was coiled like a spring. In the hush, Jonas Pierce sneered. "I've heard about gunslingers who bury their talents. Try to live a normal life. That you, driver?" Silas's jaw tightened. "Man's got a right to peace." "Peace," Slater repeated mockingly. "That's a laugh. A body like yours, all quick reflexes and silence? Bet you done things you ain't proud of. How many men have you shot, driver?" Harriet expected Silas to deny it. Instead, he simply said, "Enough." The single word landed like a thunderclap. The outlaws exchanged glances. Whatever they'd thought about Silas Dunbar a moment ago, they were reevaluating now. Westlake groaned, blood seeping through Dr. Lowe's makeshift bandage. Slater turned sharply. "If he dies, Doc, you're next." Lowe looked up, furious. "You want him to talk or not? Because a dead sheriff does you no good." Slater hissed but said nothing, allowing the doctor to continue. Returning his attention to Silas, Slater jerked his chin. "Driver, we've got a little arrangement to work out. You're going to help me collect some funds around town, or these folks die." Silas's gaze moved to Harriet. "Where you want me?" "The bank," Slater replied. "We'll gather up the deposit boxes, and then you'll load 'em on this here stage. We'll be on our way before the cavalry decides to show up, assuming they even bother with a dump like Copper Creek." Harriet bit her lip, heart pounding. If Silas refused, Slater's men would kill them all. If he complied, they'd bleed the town dry. Either way, there'd be violence. She wondered if Silas had a plan, if there was more to him than stony composure. Her question was answered by a slow, confident shift of Silas's stance. He locked eyes with Slater. "You hurt Harriet," he said quietly, "or the doc, or the sheriff, and none of you ride out of this alive." Jonas Pierce snickered, brandishing his pistol. "Tough talk from a—" Before Jonas could complete his taunt, Silas's right hand blurred. Nobody in that room saw the gun clear leather, only heard the thunderclap of the shot that sent Jonas's weapon spinning across the floor. Jonas staggered back, a scream tearing from his throat as blood ran from a graze on his forearm. Slater's men jolted to aim at Silas, but Harriet realized Silas had already reholstered. It was as if the gun had never left his coat, except Jonas Pierce was now disarmed and staring in horror at his injured hand. "Next time," Silas said softly, "I aim for the heart." For a moment, no one breathed. Harriet pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Doc Lowe hissed a warning to Westlake to stay still, lest the sheriff tear open his wound further. But Harriet saw something else in the sheriff's eyes. Recognition, as if Westlake had known all along that Silas was more than just a simple stagecoach driver. Slater recovered first, face twisted with anger. "You're fast," he acknowledged, voice trembling with fury. "But we outnumber you 6-1. The station fell silent except for Jonas's ragged breathing. Harriet half expected Silas to open fire, but his gun remained concealed beneath his coat. Tension crackled in the air, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. Finally, Slater let out a slow breath. "Fine, you've made your point. But if you don't want a bloodbath, you'll do exactly as I say. Got it?" Silas didn't answer. That silence in itself was answer enough. At dawn the next day, Slater's gang had taken over the entire station, effectively barricading Harriet, Dr. Lowe, and the wounded Sheriff Westlake in one corner. Jonas Pierce's forearm was crudely bandaged. He glowered whenever Silas passed by. The plan was simple. Slater would send 2 of his men to escort Silas to the bank, gather everything of value, and load it onto the stage. Harriet would remain behind as a hostage. Dr. Lowe would keep Westlake alive, although the sheriff was weak from blood loss. Yet Slater's chain of command was unraveling. The Santos brothers bickered about the risks of staying put in a town that might be swarming with armed citizens at any moment. Felix Morrow eyed Silas warily, as if suspecting the quiet driver might have an even bigger trick up his sleeve. Meanwhile, Jonas Pierce nursed his injured arm, spoiling for revenge. Mid-morning brought a new tension. Slater directed Manuel Santos and Jonas to accompany Silas to the bank. As they stepped outside, Harriet spotted a figure across the street. Old Jim Taggart stood near the livery, his Sharps rifle discreetly leaning against the wall. At the same time, Lily Hemphill, the school teacher, peeked out from the boarding house window. Harriet saw her slip inside, presumably to rally the few townsfolk who had mustered their courage. Harriet didn't dare signal them. She feared Slater's men would see. Instead, she watched Silas lead Manuel and Jonas along the dusty main street. Time slowed to a crawl. Sweat trickled down Harriet's temples. She didn't dare imagine how Silas would stop this robbery, or if he even could. Half an hour later, the bank's heavy door swung open. Silas emerged first, guiding a loaded handcart. Manuel walked behind him, anxious and edgy. Jonas trailed, gun drawn but eyes shifting. Harriet realized Jonas was spooked by the possibility that Silas might turn on him again. The short trek back to the station was tense, but uneventful. Inside, Slater nodded with approval when he saw the haul. "Load it," he ordered. "We're out of here by noon." Noon came and went, but Slater stalled. Harriet picked up on the outlaws' uneasy glances at windows and doorways. She realized they suspected the townspeople would rise against them if they tried to ride out in broad daylight. Indeed, she had glimpsed Jim Taggart slipping from one rooftop to another, rifle in hand. Others had taken vantage points across the street. The tension built with every passing minute. An hour before dusk, a frantic call rang out. "Riders approaching!" Slater cursed, sure it was a posse. He marched outside, barking orders for Jonas and the Santos brothers to take up defensive positions. Harriet's heart soared for a moment, thinking it might be federal marshals, until she looked out the window. The riders, a cluster of 4 or 5, galloped in with saddlebags and dust rising around them. She didn't recognize them, but their expressions were anything but friendly. They pulled up at the far end of Main Street, scanning the quiet buildings. Slater stepped out with his men, tension radiating off them. "Who are you?" he shouted. One of the new arrivals rode closer, ignoring the question. He carried himself with a rigid bearing, wore a tattered military coat, and had a white scar across his jaw. He surveyed the scene, mouth curling in amusement. "Well, Gideon Slater," he said. "I've tracked you for quite a while." Slater's confusion was clear. "What's it to you?" The newcomer's smile widened. "Name's Major Holt. I've got some business with a man rumored to be traveling in this area. Might be you stumbled into the middle of something bigger than your bank robbing spree." Silas Dunbar emerged from the station, Harriet close behind, each trying to puzzle out this new threat. Major Holt's sharp gaze landed on Silas, and his eyes lit with recognition. "Ah," Holt said, "the man they call the pallbearer. Thought you were dead, Dunbar." Silas's shoulders stiffened. Harriet felt a chill. Pallbearer? That was the first time she'd heard that name. Slater let out a short laugh. "Him?" He jabbed a thumb at Silas. "He's just some half-mute stage driver." Major Holt ignored Slater entirely. "Rumor was you retired. Always suspected you had a stash of documents from the old war. Something called the Beckwith Papers. I see you kept them hidden, but you managed to get yourself tangled in more trouble." Chunorshinun. The tension soared to an almost unbearable pitch. Now Harriet realized Silas's past was even more complicated than she'd imagined. She also knew that Major Holt's men had the look of mercenaries, and Slater's gang seemed caught off guard. No one was entirely sure who to shoot first. Slater recovered enough to point his revolver at Holt. "I don't give a damn about your war records. We're walking out of here with that bank gold, and nobody stops us." Holt's tone dripped with cold menace. "You're in my way, Slater. Stand aside and I might let you crawl out of Copper Creek alive." Slater's men bristled. Jonas Pierce spat on the ground, raising his gun. "We got no issue killing you or your men." A dangerous hush fell. Silas stepped forward, turning to Harriet just long enough to say, "Get the doc and the sheriff out the back. Now." She nodded, heart slamming in her chest. "Come with us." "Not yet," he replied, meeting her gaze. "Someone has to end this." Silas walked into the middle of the street, shrugging off his canvas coat. Underneath, he wore an older duster Harriet had never seen, black and worn, with faint traces of embroidered patterns at the cuffs. It looked like something from a lifetime ago. At his hip, the revolver that had so quickly disarmed Jonas Pierce was now openly displayed. "I'm here," Silas announced, voice carrying through the hush. "Major Holt Slater. Whoever wants me, this is your chance." Slater snarled. We just want to leave with our spoils. We didn't come here to get tangled up in your old war secrets." "Then go," Silas said simply. "Nobody's stopping you." Holt barked a mocking laugh. "If I let him go, Dunbar, I lose the bank gold he conveniently collected for me. We both know you can't handle all of us." Silas's gaze swept across Holt's men, Slater's outlaws, and the edges of the street. Taggart and other townsfolk were hidden, rifles trained on the intruders. Harriet had successfully guided Dr. Lowe and the wounded Sheriff Westlake out a back window. Now it was up to Silas alone. "You always talk too much, Holt," Silas said at last. "It's how you lost at Fort Griffin, remember?" Holt's nostrils flared. "Fort Griffin was irrelevant," Silas interrupted. "We're here now. So choose. Fight me or leave. But if you fight, I promise none of you will walk away unscathed." Slater tried to speak, but Holt's fury exploded first. "Kill him!" the major spat to his men. At that signal, chaos erupted. Shots tore through the late afternoon air. Silas dove behind a water trough, his revolver booming in return. One of Holt's riders tumbled from his saddle, and a second yelped, clutching a bleeding arm. From the rooftops, Taggart's Sharps rifle rang out, nailing a third rider before he could fire a second time. Slater's outlaws scattered, uncertain whether to join Holt's attack on Silas or flee with the gold-laden stage. Jonas Pierce, face twisted in hatred, sprinted for cover while Manuel Santos fired blindly from behind a barrel. In the melee, Harriet watched from a broken window in the station, unable to tear her gaze away. Silas moved with lethal grace, rolling, firing, reloading in fluid motions. For all Holt's mercenaries, the presence of Taggart and other hidden shooters in the buildings turned the tide. Holt, seeing his men pinned down, tried a different tactic. He roared for Slater's help, but Slater was busy shouting contradictory orders at his own gang. Manuel Santos wanted to run, Marcus Santos wanted to shoot it out, and Jonas Pierce just wanted vengeance on Silas. Pierce charged toward the trough where Silas reloaded, blade in hand, a savage approach that defied the bullets flying overhead. Silas pivoted to meet him, gun barrel snapping up. Pierce swung his knife wildly, but Silas parried with the revolver, hammered the butt into Pierce's jaw, and knocked him flat. Pierce collapsed, eyes rolling back. Nearby, Gideon Slater realized the fight was lost. He cursed, abandoned the stage, and sprinted for a horse. Harriet saw him mount up and kick the animal into a gallop, heading out of town. "He's running," she called. But Silas was busy exchanging fire with Holt's last two men. A bullet zipped past Silas's shoulder, close enough to tear his sleeve. He grimaced but fired back, dropping one of Holt's men in the street. Now only Holt himself remained standing. A trickle of blood ran down his temple, and his eyes blazed with stubborn wrath. He raised his pistol at Silas, but Taggart's rifle barked again. Holt staggered, dropping his gun. Before he could recover, Silas stepped forward and aimed at Holt's chest. "Fort Griffin," Silas said, voice steady. "You left me for dead that day." Holt glared, mouth twisting. "You weren't supposed to walk away." Neither man blinked. Time seemed to freeze. Harriet realized she was holding her breath, praying Silas wouldn't become the monster the rumors painted him to be. But Silas lowered his gun an inch. "The war's over," he said quietly. "Your fight is with ghosts." Holt panted, eyes darting. He saw no escape, no weapon. Finally, he raised his empty hands. "You're a fool if you think this ends here," he rasped. "People I work for, they'll hunt you. They'll want those papers. They'll burn Copper Creek to the ground if you stand in their way." Silas didn't answer. He merely pulled a set of handcuffs from his belt and tossed them at Holt's feet. With a bitter laugh, the major picked them up and snapped them onto his wrists. Taggart approached cautiously, rifle still raised, ready to haul Holt to the jail. When the gunfire ceased, a hush settled over Copper Creek. Townsfolk crept from hiding. Dr. Lowe, who had sheltered Sheriff Westlake behind the station, ventured out to check on the wounded, including Jonas Pierce, Manuel Santos, and the battered remains of Holt's mercenaries. Slater was gone, along with a few of his men, but he had fled empty-handed, leaving the stolen gold behind. Harriet felt her knees wobble as she stepped onto the porch. Silas was there, coat torn, face smeared with dust and sweat. His eyes revealed exhaustion and something else, an odd mix of relief and sorrow. "You're hurt," she said softly. "It's nothing," he replied. Then, to her surprise, he offered a faint smile. Didn't lose the stage. She exhaled a trembling breath. Guess not. Sheriff Westlake, supported by Dr. Lowe, emerged with a bandaged shoulder. He looked at Silas with admiration. Reckon you saved Copper Creek, Dunbar. We owe you a debt. Silas shook his head. You kept them talking long enough for me to act. If you hadn't come back when you did, things might have ended differently. Westlake nodded, evidently too weary to argue. And Holt? Going to jail, Silas said. He can answer for his own war crimes. From a corner of the street, a stranger stepped forward. A slender man in a pristine coat, looking entirely out of place. He carried a sealed envelope in one hand. Harriet tensed, sure another threat had arrived. Silas, however, didn't seem surprised. Markham, Silas greeted, voice lacking warmth. The stranger gave a polite bow. Well met, Mr. Dunbar. My employers heard rumors you were alive, still in possession of certain documents. Today's events confirm your location. They asked me to deliver this message. Harriet and Westlake exchanged a startled glance. Dr. Lowe, who must have known something of Silas's background, simply sighed. Silas took the envelope warily. Let me guess, your people want the Beckwith papers quiet. Forever. Markham nodded. Precisely. If not, they'll come for you, and for anyone who shelters you. But they also offered a courtesy, intelligence that Slater's men were on their way. I believe you found that useful? I didn't ask for it, Silas replied. Yes, well, Markham tapped the brim of his hat. Use the enclosed instructions carefully. If you want to avoid more trouble, you know what to do. With that, he slipped away down the street, evading the disapproving scowl of Sheriff Westlake and the watchful eyes of Harriet. Silas stuffed the letter into his pocket, turning back to the battered station. He helped Harriet gather scattered papers, right overturned chairs, and check on the remaining outlaws who had surrendered or been wounded. By dusk, the chaos calmed. Westlake arranged for Holt to be transported under guard to the nearest territorial outpost. Slater's remaining men who hadn't fled were locked up in the makeshift jail, awaiting justice. Later that night, Harriet found Silas alone in the station office, staring at a battered old trunk. The black duster he'd worn during the fight lay folded on the trunk's lid, next to a well-used revolver. She entered quietly. That was quite a day. He nodded, eyes distant. Slater's gang, Holt's men, couldn't have predicted it all colliding at once. Harriet stepped closer, noticing a dog-eared document labeled in faint lettering. Beckwith papers. Her pulse quickened. That's what they're after. Silas grimaced. Evidence from the war. Names, dates, bribes. It implicates people in high places. I promised a friend years ago I'd destroy it, but never did. Now these secrets threaten places like Copper Creek. So destroy it, Harriet said, desperation creeping into her voice. Burn it. Bury it. Something. He hesitated. What about justice? Some of these men never answered for their crimes. Is that your fight? She countered gently. Is it worth bringing new trouble to this town? Before he could respond, footsteps approached. Sheriff Westlake, with Dr. Lowe supporting him, leaned against the doorframe. The sheriff offered a weary grin. Harriet's right, you know. We can't ask you to stay here and fight endless battles, but we also can't pretend this is just your problem. You saved us. We stand with you if you want to stand with us. Silas exhaled, uncertainty heavy in his eyes. I don't want Copper Creek caught in the crossfire. This place is stronger than you think, Harriet said firmly, and you're more than a stage driver, Silas Dunbar. He looked down at the trunk, at the black duster and revolver. Then he gently closed the trunk, pressing his palm against the lid. 3 years ago, I wanted nothing but peace. Tried to bury my guns, my name. But you found a home, Harriet added quietly. Here. Silas nodded, finally allowing a faint glimmer of hope into his expression. Guess I did. Over the following weeks, word spread about the showdown in Copper Creek, how Gideon Slater's gang fled, how Major Holt's mercenaries were routed, how the quiet stage driver revealed himself to be a near-legendary gunfighter. The name pallbearer circulated in hushed tones across the territory, but Silas did not embrace it. He remained silent Silas to those who knew him best. Sheriff Westlake slowly recovered, and with Dr. Lowe's help, resumed his duties. Harriet reopened the station, sending telegrams that the route to Fort Laramie was safe to travel again. Silas continued to drive the coach on occasion, though the stage line's managers, spooked by rumors, began to pressure Harriet to let him go. One afternoon, Silas discovered a letter from the line's head office, politely terminating his employment. Harriet was furious, but Silas merely shrugged. "It's time," he said. "I have other obligations." Still, he didn't leave Copper Creek. The people insisted he stay, offered him free lodging, and pressed him to consider wearing a badge. Sheriff Westlake even pinned a deputy star on Silas's duster one day with a grin. "Think about it," the sheriff said. "You'd be good at it." Silas held the star, silent as always, but Harriet saw a flicker of acceptance in his eyes. Maybe it was time for a new identity altogether, one that combined the best of who he had been and who he wanted to become. At day's end, Harriet watched Silas stroll down the dusty road, the setting sun casting long shadows behind him. In those shadows lay his old life, the secrets, the regrets, the whispered name of the pallbearer. Ahead stretched the promise of a town that needed him, not as a hired gun, but as a protector and friend. Sometimes, she thought, the quietest people carried the loudest truths. And in the hush of Copper Creek's twilight, Silas Dunbar walked on, carrying more hope than he'd known in years, alongside the burden of a past only he could choose to leave behind. In the aftermath, Copper Creek was never the same, and neither was Sam Kincade. The feared pole-bearer was finally laid to rest, replaced by a man who had rediscovered purpose, friendship, and belonging. Sam's courage and integrity not only saved the town, but also redeemed his own troubled past. Sheriff Mallister's badge, once temporarily worn by Sam, became a symbol of hope, resilience, and second chances. Copper Creek thrived, a living testament to what ordinary people could achieve when standing united against adversity. But this is just one perspective. What did you think about Sam's decision to finally leave his violent legacy behind? Was it the right choice? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you for being a part of our storytelling community.